What happened to 4-year-old Brandon Sims? Well, attorney Diane Marger Moore thinks she has some answers, and she's going to share it with us. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing out there? Probably just getting home from work and all that good stuff. It's still hot. I've been in here about an hour and a half and I'm still sweating. I think a lot of it is the air conditioner's like back there and then behind the screen here it doesn't come through. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Hots Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you have a paranormal thing going on in your home or business, we can help you out. It might take us a bit to get out there because California is a huge state. People don't realize, when they think of California, they think of the Beach Boys, right? Like Hawaii, beaches and surfing. Well, it is like that, but there's also areas that it's very rural. Rural. I gotta say that word, rural. There's desert, there's high desert, there's low desert, there's farmland, there's mountains. We got a little bit of everything. But the state is just really huge. So, like I said, it might take us a couple days to get you. And in the case, that it does take us a couple days to get to you, we do have mediums on staff who can phone you and talk to you about what may or may not be going on. And if it does turn out to be a paranormal issue, in most cases, they can calm the energy down until we get out there. But it doesn't take us more than a couple days. Okay, that being said, if you guys are watching from Facebook tonight, and a lot of you are, please be sure to hit that follow button if you haven't done so already. And please be sure to come on in the chat room and talk amongst yourselves tonight. And also, see, I'm always giving you guys requests. Show me some love, give me some thumbs up, give me some happy hearts and all that good stuff. Because what that does is that puts us into the FYP, which is the For You page. If you don't know what that is, allow me to clarify. When you scroll down on Facebook and you get past the reels, there's another bunch of stuff down there, and this is the stuff that Facebook suggests for you. It might be a group, it could be people, maybe a long-lost friend you haven't seen in 80 years. I don't know. But it could be people. That's what the FYP page is. It's For You page. So the more you guys comment, the more you guys, show me the love, the higher up in the computer we go, and then Facebook sees that, Facebook sees that, then it puts us in the suggest thing. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? Is sharing the show. So please be sure to even share it physically. All right, just share us across. And how I say at the end, if you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 people. That's how you get the word out, and you guys have done really good with that. Same thing with YouTube. Only at YouTube, I've got over 1,000 shows, and they're all this show over sitting at YouTube. I've started to put them into categories to make it easier for you to find shows. For instance, if you're into psychic, or medium rather, Nancy Matz, if I call her a psychic, she'll slap me. If you're into medium Nancy Matz, there is a file for her. There's a file for Linda Salvin. There's a file for cryptids. You name it, there's a file for it. And that's to make it easier for you to find the shows, because when I go over there to look somebody up that I've had on previously, I'll tell you, I get a headache. So I did this for you guys. All right. There are weird background noises going on. I don't know what that is. It's going to be like that today, huh? Oh, it's the dog. That's who it was. I couldn't figure out who it was. Anyway, I don't know if I introduced myself. My name is Charlotte, by the way. I just started to get started. I was so excited to get started. Anyway, same thing for YouTube. If you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so if you like what you see today. And talk amongst yourselves in the chat room. Show me some love, all that good stuff. And I believe we're on Twitch tonight, so same thing. And all these social media sites work similarly. The only one that's kind of an off-site is a TikTok, which we're not broadcasting tonight over on TikTok. But with TikTok, if you want to show some love, you have to double tap the screen over there. And you can subscribe. Become part of my Boo Crew. Go to TikTok, check out the California Hot site. Subscribe, become part of my Boo Crew. All right? We do ghost stories, tarot card reading, all kinds of stuff over there. Okay, tonight, You guys know my real job outside of this is I'm a journalist, photojournalist. I spent 5 years on the crime beat. And in those 5 years, I saw things I would rather not have seen, but it happens, right? I mean, not only was I covering courts and murders and, unalivings. We don't want to get in trouble today. Unalivings and car accidents and all that stuff. I have seen some stuff that would make you have nightmares. I've witnessed stuff where I've been out on location, especially car accidents. My guest tonight, Diane Marger, Diane Marger Moore, has a story to tell. She's an attorney, and I'll let her tell the main thing to get up to this. But the bottom line is with this story, it's about a little boy, little 4-year-old little boy, who went missing. And unfortunately, she was able. Well, fortunately for her, unfortunately for the little boy's family, Diane was able to get a conviction on a missing child, and that's very, very hard to do. Let me call Diane in here and see if I said it right. This is my look. I didn't say it right either. Let me call her in, and she can start telling you about herself, and then we'll get into the sad story of what happened to Brandon Sims. Here we go. Hello.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
I'm excited to have you on.
Well, I don't know why, but I'm glad to be here.
Like I said earlier, as a crime reporter, I've seen a lot of things. But 5 years, we were in this little town, the smaller city called Woodland. But in the 5 years I was there were gang shootings, women killing their husbands. I mean, all this stuff was going on. And in addition to a lot of car accidents. And I have seen a lot. And the ones that really bothered me were the things involving little kids. And when I heard when I heard about your book, and then I listened to a couple interviews that you had done previously, it hit me right in the heart. This one in particular. Tell me about you. Before we get going, tell me about you, and then we'll get rolling.
So, as you can see, I'm a geezer. I've been a lawyer for a little more than 46 years. And during that time, I was a federal public defender. I've been a criminal defense lawyer. But where my heart always was being a prosecutor. And I had the opportunity in Indianapolis, although I'd already been a lawyer for several years, to become a prosecutor and only prosecute murder and arson cases. And so at 41 or 42 years old, I started as a prosecutor and realized that it truly was my calling. And so that's what I began to do. I've been a civil lawyer and done a number of things. I'm currently special counsel at the Attorney General's office in Florida. But being able to obtain justice, particularly for a child, and I had 2 child murder cases, I think is the most important thing I've done in my career.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So if my understanding is right with this case, because I did do a little bit of research on it myself, this little boy just disappeared. No, nobody ever found a body?
Well, that's correct. Law enforcement learned about it because the mother was essentially caught by friends in a lie about where Brandon was. She told her friends that Brandon was with his father, but in fact his father was in jail. And so for 2 years, Brandon saw no one. And the mother claimed that she had gently placed his body somewhere off of I-65 in Indiana.
Wow. And she was really young when she had him, correct?
She was 14 when she had him. She had an interesting and possibly a very rough childhood. She claimed that her mother was abusive, but there were reports that and her name is Michelle Jones, that
Mhm.
Michelle had abused one of her aunts. And so it was interesting. But when she was 14, she became pregnant with Brandon, um, with her then boyfriend, Kevin Sims.
Mhm. Mhm. And so, what happened
Um,
after she realized she was pregnant?
well, she and Kevin wanted the baby. She had the child. She ended up in a group home because when her
Mhm.
mother found out she was pregnant, she kicked her out of the house. Kevin had a very supportive mother named Arlene Blevins, who
Mhm.
was so thrilled about this baby. So when Michelle went into the group home, um, Arlene Blevins, after Brandon was born, kept him for 3 years and raised him with love and encouragement.
Mhm.
Um, when he was a little over 3, Michelle, who by then had married uh, a member the, of an Islamic group, wanted the baby back and cut off all contact between the grandmother and the child.
Wow. And then Brandon was diagnosed with something as well, right? Around this time, or was it sooner?
Yeah. After Michelle, even though she was very young, had a terrific job with Eli Lilly, which, for those of you that don't know, it's a pharmaceutical company, but it is a wonderful employer.
Mhm.
They have health care for all of their employees, including Michelle, including her son. They have daycare. But Brandon was diagnosed with something called the lay term is precocious puberty. So
Mhm.
even though he was only 3.5 years old, he began to get um, symptoms as if he were an adolescent. And that means that he had hair under his arms and in his genital area. And it was something that could have been treated with medications. But once he was diagnosed, um, she never took him back to the doctors to do anything
Hmm.
to assist him with that condition. She was
Did she ever?
also,
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
no, no, she was, when asked about the condition,
Mhm.
because if he played with friends or anything else, she said, either I ain't going to raise no freak, or perhaps said it in a more grammatically correct manner.
Mhm.
One way or the other, that's what she expressed. Well, all this was going on, Grandma Arlene Blevins, and when Kevin Sims got out of jail, it was a
Mhm.
relatively minor charge. They wanted the baby. They wanted to look for him. They wanted to visit him. And they weren't permitted to do that.
Mm. So she moved at some point as well, right? Was that to get away from them?
Well, no, it was, so to give you an idea, when she had the baby,
Mhm.
she had a group of friends that was enviable when she got out of foster care. She was working for Eli Lilly, very talented young woman. She was in a number of plays and dance groups, and a number of older African American women just sort of scooped her up. They were very maternal. They
Mhm.
really loved this woman. And um, so she became part of their group. um, Brandon was at some of the things, um, picnics and things like that. But when Kevin Sims got out of jail, he started looking for the baby and actually went to one of her friends, again, an
Mhm.
older woman. And when I say older, not older like me, but I mean older like 40s at that point, and was looking for his son. And the woman said to him, "What? Michelle told us that you had Brandon." And so those women got together, three of them, including one who's quite famous in Indianapolis in the art scene, and confronted her. And Michelle confessed um, that Brandon was dead. And then she checked herself into a mental health facility at Wishart Hospital. That's how
Wow.
law enforcement became involved. So when law enforcement became involved, she promised that she would show them where she had hidden the body.
Mm-hmm.
There were several visits to see her, and the visit when the law enforcement officer, a wonderfully tenacious um, father, who was also a homicide detective sergeant, went to pick her up, to take her to find where she had buried Brandon along the highway. She had lawyered up
Mm-hmm.
and wouldn't tell him anything. And so, having confessed to her friends,
Mm-hmm.
she then decided to move out of town. She had been part of the Nation of Islam. She had been with her friends who were Christian. And she moved up to the farthest northern part of Indiana, where she joined a Santeria group.
Makes
Um,
sense. Now I understand. I don't know if what I read is correct, but in doing research on this the last couple of days, that there were signs leading up to something being wrong. That people had in her apartment complex wherever she was living. That there were a lot of flies like on a certain window of the apartment complex.
well, what happened was, because this was the first case in Indiana where we were trying
Mm-hmm.
to prosecute someone for murder without a body,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
then the case was going to be completely circumstantial. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're prosecuting a circumstantial case, building block by block
Mm-hmm.
each piece of evidence is critical. And so,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we knew that she had lived in this apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
When the detective had gone to the apartment complex to find out about what might have happened to Brandon, they initially told him that they had no records. So
Mm-hmm.
he and I went back. I'm not a very subtle person.
It's
And
okay.
so I suggested that they hand over their records,
Right.
um, and they did. And what we found was, when Michelle moved out,
Mm-hmm.
they had noted brown stains on the rug of the smaller bedroom that would have been Brandon's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, we went to that house. We took samples of that rug, but it had been 3 years because Michelle
Right.
had hidden him for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the samples showed that there was some form of human evidence, but it could not be adequately traced and it could not be identified as his. And so
Mm-hmm.
we began to talk to all of the neighbors
Mm-hmm.
and the management company. And when we found the manager of the apartments, we were able to find out that she had walked by that apartment, and it was a street floor apartment, during the summer that we know Brandon died,
Mm-hmm.
and she had seen all of these flies, um, thousands of flies. She said she'd never seen anything like it, which suggested to us that there had been blood and that Brandon, this little 4-year-old, had died alone in his bedroom. That the bloodstain evidence was never allowed into evidence because
Mm-hmm.
it couldn't be completely tied up. The other facts from her apartment complex were that summer she washed her car almost daily. Neighbors talked about how frequently she was washing the car. So that was the beginning, just the beginning of evidence to suggest that um, Brandon had not just been left alone as a 4-year-old for multiple
Mm-hmm.
days, but that
Mm-hmm.
he had been injured before he was left alone.
When you say washed her car, from what I understand from my research, she was washing it inside and out. Correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Um, and She hadn't done that before that summer. They'd lived there
Mhm.
for a little while.
Mhm.
Understand that in the meantime, law enforcement, volunteers, I mean, we had law enforcement officers on their days off. We
Mhm.
were searching all over Indiana. She said that she had buried him along I 65.
Mhm.
Every single exit was checked and searched. There were, what were there? Hold on, I wrote it down. There were 31 exits between 465 and North in Indiana.
Mhm.
Um, we checked the apartment itself, had a sliding glass door onto a field. And when I say we, I mean me too. I was
Mhm.
out there on weekends. We were looking, and it was very clear. Um, we never found that body despite spending a lot of time looking. We never found the baby.
Wow. So how you have to put this together? I mean, obviously she confessed, but you still don't have the smoking gun, right? You don't have the body. So as you're building your case, how long did that take to build a case to even take this to court with her?
It took a very long time. Her confession was not going to be admissible because when she spoke to law enforcement, she was in a mental health facility,
Of course.
right? So
Right.
we knew that wasn't coming in. What she told her friends was that he had died, but there was no admission that she had done anything to him.
Mhm.
Um, and so, one of the things we looked at, for example, and it takes patience, and I talk about that because rushes to judgment are where these kind of cases get lost.
Right.
So, we got the records from Eli Lilly that showed about a year later, she took him off her health insurance. Why
Wow.
is that? It wasn't costing her anything. Um, she um, never spoke of him. And
Mhm.
when the detective spoke with her at the mental health facility at Wishard, the one thing that he kept saying is she never mentioned his name. She just referred to him as the child. So all of those things began to add up in little bitty pieces. What
Mhm.
really was the beginning of us having a prosecutable case was that in order to prove that Brandon was dead, because she could have always come to trial and said, no, I gave him to my cousin in Arizona or something
Right.
like that. The detective filed what's called a CHINS action, child in need of services, in the juvenile court. And the juvenile judge ordered Michelle Engron Jones to bring the baby into court. Okay, if he exists, let's see him. And after
Mhm.
multiple hearings, she finally admitted in court, after being compelled, that he was dead. So that admission could never be used at a trial.
Hmm.
Okay? However, the flip side is if she tried to lie about it and testify at a trial, it could be used against her. So, when there was a great deal of publicity about the child in need of services case, that was the first time we learned about the girlfriends that she had confessed to. But
Hmm.
again, she had only said he died. She never admitted that she had hurt him.
Mhm.
So it wasn't until we were already ready for the trial. We'd only charged her with neglect of a child
Mhm.
causing injury, which was a B felony. She probably would have gotten no time at all, but she refused to plead to anything.
Mhm.
That we got a phone call um, from a gal who said that Clarissa Dunlap, who was a Santeria priestess, she was also a prison guard, but she was a Santeria priestess, um, who said that Michelle had admitted to having hurt him and left little tiny plates of food for him before she left him alone for 4 days to go to. a lovely conference where she met a nice guy, she said.
Only 4 years old.
Pretty horrifying. So Clarissa Dunlap was a key to the case, but we were in Indiana in the 90s. A Santeria princess might not have had the most credibility. And the court held a hearing on whether or not there was enough evidence. It's something called the corpus delicti rule. A confession cannot be used unless there is sufficient surrounding circumstances and evidence to support that. And the reason being that back in the bad old days, it is alleged that police beat confessions from people, and we now know that they did. And so it was very important in Indiana that even though someone confessed, that you had all of this other evidence. And Clarissa Dunlap sort of was the icing, I guess, along with all of the other, the blood, the apartment, the fact that he was off the insurance, all of those things were beginning to add up
Right.
to a case of murder.
Absolutely fascinating. Now the question is, were you guys able to access, because she was in a mental institution, right?
Right.
Were you guys able to get a psychiatrist? Because I know, I've been through a bunch of trials. So were you guys able to get a psychiatrist to analyze her before the
No,
trial?
she only stayed there. She claimed that she had an emotional breakdown by speaking to her friends about Brandon's death. So she stayed, I don't remember, I believe it was about a week. And then she got out, and then she left town. I guess she didn't want to face her friends. And like I said, her friends were these just wonderful, classy, as I said, I was a little envious. Her friends were these wonderful women who were supportive and wanted to support her and tried to support her. And their attitude was, if she'd had a problem with this child, why didn't she tell us? We would have taken him. And of course, there was Arlene Blevins, who loved the baby, who'd kept him for 3 years, who she could have gone to at any point in time.
And it wasn't like he was going to be really expensive because she had the medical coverage. So I mean, she could have given him the proper medical stuff to slow down the puberty.
Sure, or Arlene, or while Kevin was in prison,
Right.
and or Kevin when he got out would pay child support. It didn't have to do with money because she seemed to be doing quite well at Eli Lilly. And she went back to Lilly after he was gone, obviously, since she took him off the insurance. So that had nothing to do with it.
So did she ever describe how she unalived him?
No.
Okay.
No. She admitted that she had gone to this conference with another woman, a theater conference, and left him home alone for 4 days or 5 days. Initially, she said it was a week, but it turns out it was 4 days. But even though Brandon was 4, he was larger because of this precocious puberty. And his grandmother had said that even when he was a 3-year-old, he was able to climb up on the counter and open the refrigerator. So we knew that Brandon could have gotten food or water during that 4 days and likely could have survived if she hadn't beaten him before she left. So those things all added into the equation. And it was a very, very close call as to whether or not to bring the murder charges. But my view was, as a prosecutor, it was so important when one of the things that, unfortunately, as a prosecutor, you get a little, not cold hearted, but you try and separate from the cases. As I met with Kevin Sims before the trial, and just to tell him, what I expected would take place and a little bit about his testimony, I said, now, Brandon's dead. And this man, this 6'3", this big man just started sobbing. He did not want to believe that this lovely little boy was dead. And I felt horrible that I had said it in that way, because I think that he and Arlene Blevins wanted to believe that Brandon was alive somewhere, but he wasn't, and he isn't.
It's really heartbreaking, and like you say, you don't want it seem cold-blooded because that's your job. Just like with me as a reporter at that point in my life, the story gets done, trial gets held, I have to move on. I have to shift gears, move on to the next story. So
Well,
it's
yeah,
hard when you're dealing with parents. I remember there was a gang shooting, and the thing that got me was that it was a fatal gang shooting, but the mothers of the gang members were in court in their Sunday dresses, looking really good, and they were crying because I guess, now who knows, because how gangs are, runs in families, but they were crying and they were just in tears that they couldn't believe that their son had committed this murder. So I didn't interview them personally, so I have no clue, whether this, you know what I mean, because family affairs, right? But
sure.
to see that, and like you're saying, to have him crying like that, yeah, I mean, it's really hard to see that.
Well, and I have to. So he had three very, very competent. Michelle had three very, very competent lawyers representing her during the trial.
Hmm.
Um, Very competent lawyers. And um, it took us a while to try the case because all of the witnesses needed to come in. One of her friends, the one to whom she had said the most, had some form of cancer. She was in the hospital. She was seriously ill, um, ultimately terminally ill. And I asked her if she was willing to come to court. And she said she had to for Brandon. And so we brought her in an ambulance, and she came. And this wasn't a woman trying to get back. This was a woman who cared about this little child
Hmm.
that Michelle apparently didn't care about.
Hmm. Hmm. And it being her friends, especially on this trip that she went on, she didn't even have any remorse on this either. I mean, she just went on her happy way to go on this trip, right?
Yeah, what was shocking was, while she knows that this child, and I was the mother of small children at the time.
Uh
My
huh.
kids are now adults, but I would go home every night and hug them. Just I couldn't imagine. Anyway, interestingly, the judge, who was also a female, had a small child as well. And, you know, hearing that a mother could do this, one of the hardest things, y'all will remember, I think her name was Susan Smith. Do you remember she had two little boys, these beautiful little blonde kids, and she put them in a car and drowned them because the boyfriend
Yes,
didn't
I
like them?
remember that.
Okay.
Yep.
Before that became public, convicting a parent of killing their child was nearly impossible. Now,
Hmm.
our case happened to be before that,
Hmm.
but jurors don't want to believe that a parent can do such a thing, especially if they're parents. And our
Right.
jurors had children. Our jurors were, it was either 50-50 or a little more. African Americans, I thought it was very important that they be on the jury. Um, and Michelle was African American, as you can see from the baby.
Hmm.
Um, so, yeah, it was a very difficult thing for everybody involved.
And how did you? I mean, like you say, you had circumstantial evidence. You had to you had to be really careful, what you put together and how you presented it. How do you feel that you were able to get through to the jury? Because obviously, like you just said, parents don't, the people that don't know about the stuff or are involved with it don't believe it because they don't want to believe that someone could do something to their kid.
Well, I think it's the little tiny things. It was the flies. It was the washing the inside and outside of your car all of the time. It was taking him off their insurance. But those are the kind of things that take, you don't immediately, when the detective knew that the baby had been killed or died,
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't automatically jump to the conclusion to get all of that information. And
Right.
so it takes a team of, a prosecutor who cares, a detective who's willing to spend the time. And Mike Crook spent a great deal of time on the case.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's all of those little things that mattered. And the fact that Michelle had these wonderful friends.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I certainly argued to the jury at the end, one, that if you buried your child, you'd know where he was, um, and would be willing to show him if
Mm-hmm.
if that evidence, she was smart enough to know that if we found the body, we would likely find whatever the abuse had been.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and friends talked about the fact that she would deprive him of food if, she didn't want him to look like a 7-year-old. She wanted him to look like a 4-year-old. He couldn't
Right.
help it. Um, so it was just a matter of taking the time and the patience to acquire the evidence. And
Mm-hmm.
I focused on that because at the time that some publicity came out just a few years ago, there was a comparison to the Casey Anthony case.
Yeah.
And of course, that was a wham, bam, go to trial. Don't take the time to get all the
Mm-hmm.
evidence together.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, I think that at the end of the trial, after closing argument, the detective and I went to my favorite place to wait for juries, which was a little restaurant in town.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way there, I said to him, I did my best. He was very experienced, and I was a baby prosecutor, essentially. I mean, I'd only been
Mm-hmm.
prosecuting for a year. And I asked him, well, what do you think? And he said, they'll never convict her. My heart just fell. Um, but they did.
Mm-hmm.
And then what was very fascinating was the sentencing. Um, the in Indiana at that time, we had presumptive sentences for different forms of criminal activities. Murder had a presumptive sentence of 40 years. If there were aggravating circumstances, the court could go up to 60 years. And if there were mitigating circumstances, the court could go down.
Mm-hmm.
The judge at sentencing, Michelle's lawyers argued that she should get the minimum sentence. And they talked about and brought in, whether she was abused as a child and all of these factors.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge, pretty wise judge, she ended up being the chief judge for the Southern District of Indiana and the federal court system. The judge said, that child had a right to trust you and believe you. And so the judge gave her an aggravated sentence of 50 years. Of course, she didn't serve 50 years.
What? I know this was dead just there. Um, as you say, she didn't serve 50 years. Why was that? Did she get out on good behavior, or?
Well, as I said, she was a very smart young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And talented. Um, I just thought it was such a waste. Anyway, while she was in prison, she and some of the other women prisoners, um, Indiana had one of the oldest women's prisons,
Mm-hmm.
did a history of how women had been treated in prison, and particularly in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It was pretty awful, but they did a history of it.
Mm-hmm.
And a professor from Harvard saw her writing, knew that she was the organizer of this. In the meantime, she had gotten her degrees from colleges in Indiana that allowed prisoners to take college classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so Harvard offered her a full scholarship, and the prison system let her out. Harvard offered her a full scholarship to get a PhD. But she never, although she had told people, and to this day admits that she spent 20 years in prison,
Mm-hmm.
she apparently had not said that she was convicted of killing her own child. And so when some professors found out that that's what she had served 20 years for,
Mm-hmm.
um, there was an uproar. Um, the New York Times wrote a major article condemning Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my position was, look, I prosecuted her. She served her sentence. Whoever it was made a decision to release her. I hope she does some good in this world. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, but Harvard ended up rescinding that offer, which made quite the headlines. Of course, all of this is in my book.
Of course. Your
Of
book.
course, I've got to put that in my book.
Here is the book right here. See, I'm on it. I'm on
you're, you're a good woman, Charlotte. Thank you.
it. Now, I want to digress just really quick because there's a little more involved from what I've read, if it's true. If you go to different websites and you're going to get, like, different stories on stuff without
Sure.
going to the law papers. I can't fly to Indiana and pull the files anymore. But I understand that her explanation for the flies was that he had wet the bed, and that's why they were there. Was that one of her explanations? Is that true?
It was. And
Mm-hmm.
when you say her, she never testified.
Okay.
And so her lawyers asked experts about what could cause flies.
Mm-hmm.
And urination can cause flies to exist. Her grandmother, Arlene Blevins, said that by the time he was 3, he was no longer wetting the bed.
Okay.
He was a smart kid, too. I mean, look at his
Uh-huh.
mom. His mom was smart. I don't know about Kevin. I only knew him briefly, but um, so yeah. So of course the defense was. I mean, the defense mounted a defense for her, um, claiming that maybe she was negligent in leaving him alone, but that she hadn't done anything. And of course, um, that was betrayed by some of her actions and some of the testimony.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, how long did it take from the moment that the investigation started to take this to trial?
Well, the investigation started, and no homicide prosecutor in our office was willing to prosecute the case.
Mm-hmm.
So the detective came to me. I was the arson prosecutor at that time, and asked me to prosecute it. So about 9 months had already gone by from the time he was at Wishard to when he contacted me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it took another year to get the Chins action done.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that was preparatory to various hearings and motions. And
Mm-hmm.
then the trial took, I believe, a week
Okay.
long trial.
Wow, that was fast.
So it took a while. Now, there was some interesting things that sort of that I left out that your viewers might find interesting. One
Okay.
day I'm driving with Sergeant Crook, and he's a very calm. I'm not sure how he felt about some junior prosecutor being on his. I don't mean junior, but I hadn't been in the prosecutor's office long.
Mhm.
Um, and he gets a message over the radio, and it was the first time I ever saw him disturbed. And he put on lights and sirens, and we went to the largest cemetery in Indianapolis, a very old cemetery. Someone had found what they thought were body parts under a tree with a note in it, and the note had his name, the elected prosecutor's name, and some of the witnesses' names on it. And I mean, law enforcement was very disturbed.
Mhm.
Um, he said I wasn't disturbed because my name wasn't on it, but in fact, when I looked in the bag, um, I could tell that it was a tongue, an animal tongue.
Mhm.
So the Santeria priestess, along with Michelle, had put that in the cemetery to keep people from talking.
Wow. That is interesting. Wow.
They found it pretty scary. I
Oh,
guess
absolutely. Good.
if I hadn't been to New York delis and had tongue, I wouldn't have known what it was either.
Right. Right. That's scary.
Yeah.
That is very scary. And it was, and like the abuse thing. I mean, was there ever any indication that? I mean, obviously you said that he had been abused. How do you know about the abuse?
Of him,
Yeah.
we only know, and I wouldn't call it abuse
Okay.
until he was killed, because Clarissa
Mhm.
Dunlap talked about the fact that she admitted to beating him.
Mhm.
But for example, there was a picnic with a bunch of kids and things like that. And when he went to eat some of the food at the picnic, his mother said, "You're not allowed to have any of that food." And some of her friends talked about that they felt that she disciplined him inappropriately. In
Mhm.
addition, one of her friends said that she dropped him off one day and didn't come back for 2 days when she was supposed to pick him up that afternoon.
Wow.
Now that friend said, "Hey, again, if you need to leave him with me, I've got other kids. One more is no problem." Um,
Mhm.
but she chose not to take that route.
Right. Right.
And as I said, after 20 years, she is out of prison.
Right.
And
Were you guys, like I said, I asked earlier about the psychiatrist to have her evaluated because I know with different murder cases, a psychiatrist is brought in to evaluate the suspect. Were you able to do that at all?
no, we did
Okay.
not.
Okay.
The only the only experts we had were the routine ones.
Mhm.
We couldn't even bring in a medical examiner. We didn't have a body.
Mhm.
So we did not. We had an expert on flies,
Mhm.
but pretty much that was it. It was just all of the other evidence. And of course, her case was appealed
Mhm.
um, and affirmed on appeal.
Wow. It's amazing that you were even able to get a conviction on this.
I thought that by the time we added all of the building blocks together, that it had
Mhm.
become a pretty strong case. I really did. And
Mhm.
um, as I said, I was hired as the arson prosecutor, and in
Right.
arson cases, they're almost all circumstantial.
Mhm.
And so you realize that circumstantial cases, I think circumstantial evidence is much stronger. Direct evidence is somebody testifying what they saw.
Mhm.
Circumstantial evidence is other evidence that you put together. And we know that people misidentify people all the time.
Right.
So I felt it was a strong case. There are a lot of people that didn't agree with me, but
Mhm.
thankfully the jury and the judge did.
Mhm. Mhm. How long, or how hard was it to pick a jury? Because I mean, this must have been all over the newspapers, when they arrested her.
It was. We were very fortunate. Um, Although people had heard about it,
Mhm.
they'd heard about the Chin's action. When
Mhm.
she had done and I'll call it coerced because the judge ordered her to state
Mhm.
whether he was alive or not, that was not publicized because juvenile and Chin's actions are confidential.
Right.
So there was press about the case, but not about her confessions.
Okay. Makes sense.
So otherwise, it might have been quite difficult to pick a jury.
Mhm. Mhm. I can't imagine, his grandmother, and how badly she wanted to have him, and then to have this happen.
Oh, she was an incredibly just nice, hardworking gal who loved this little guy. I mean, she spent can you imagine spending 3 years with your grandson?
Mhm.
And then, one, the mother takes him away, which
Mhm.
she had every legal right to, and
Right.
wouldn't even let her talk to him, and then find out that she killed him. It's just a horrible thing, a horrible thing.
And I just wonder why she would admit to killing him. I mean, she could have kept it secret, and nobody would have been the wiser.
Well, again, she never admitted, even after the jury convicted her, the judge asked her if she wanted to make a statement at sentencing.
Mhm.
And her statement essentially was, and I don't remember it verbatim, although I believe I quoted in the book, but she said, "I'm not a murderer." She
Wow.
left him home alone. She
Yep.
told her friends that she had left little tiny plates of food for him. Instead of saying, "I left food in the refrigerator," she said, "I left little plates of food next to his bed," um, with all of the evidence. So, no, she never confessed to murdering him.
Okay. Okay.
And we never got to introduce what she said to law enforcement at
Right.
the trial. It was only
Right.
what she said to her various friends.
Mhm. Mhm. That's probably really difficult to convict a case like that. I'm really impressed. I mean, like you say, it's just all circumstantial, and it's so impressive to know that you were able to do that with this
Well,
case.
you saw the picture of that little guy.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll bring it
I
back up
have to
here.
confess, he touched my heart. And we had another picture that they never put in the paper, but it was of his dad and grandmother holding him. I
Mhm.
mean, just this precious child. How could you possibly not, want to make sure that? I mean, his dad just wanted to find him, and they were somewhat religious. They wanted to, you know, to give him a proper um, service or something, and have never been able to do that. Never,
Hmm.
not to this day.
And how long was it after the trial that you wrote your book?
Years later.
Okay.
The trial was in the 90s, and I wrote the book in, I think, 2018.
Wow.
Um, I had, um, I tried another murder case that was totally circumstantial, and I wrote
Mhm.
that book first,
Mhm.
mainly because a detective with whom I had become very close just said, "You got to tell that story," and then
Mhm.
sort of convinced me to do this. So, this book was pretty straightforward to write because I still feel the same emotion about it.
Right. Right. How long did it take you to write it?
You know, it's funny. I think it took me 8 or 9 months,
Okay.
but but one shouldn't think that The other one took me 3 years. So,
Right.
but this was just right on my heart. Um,
Mhm.
and I did obtain the transcript because I wanted to be very, very accurate and tried to portray her defense as well. I mean,
Mhm.
what their arguments were. I
Mhm.
think that it's really important when you talk about, especially if a party, a prosecutor is writing the case,
Mhm.
it's so tempting to still be arguing your case when in fact it's only fair to show both sides. And so
Mhm.
hopefully the book covers that. It
Mhm.
includes a little of my, awful sense of humor because without humor, how could you survive investigating a case like that?
Right. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
What do you have to
But
say? Like let's say you're doing your closing argument today. So what do
yes,
you have to say? Remember, we have 5 minutes. I'm just saying. What do you have to say, to people about this case? In fact, one of my favorite questions is: you're standing on the street in Las Vegas, and there's other prosecutors out that have books similar to what you wrote. How do you bring people in to read your book?
you know, I have to say that that is what I am worst at is
Mhm.
promoting. It, writing this book was pretty straightforward. It came from the heart.
Mhm.
Promoting it is something that is much, much, much harder.
Mhm.
I've talked to some people about it. It's very interesting. Um, I was hired here in Florida as the director of the Conviction Review Unit.
Mhm.
And my new boss, the elected prosecutor or the appointed prosecutor, I said, if you want to get to know me, here's my book. And she read it, and then she asked me to give a presentation to the other lawyers because it does talk about how you put evidence together,
Mhm.
how you take the time to build that block in a circumstantial case. And what I tell people is look, we have to understand that there are some mothers under great stress. If
Mhm.
Michelle hadn't had all of these people that would have taken Brandon and helped her,
Right.
then maybe you have a little bit of sympathy for or empathy for her situation. But
Mhm.
she had so many people to go to that I believe her punishment was absolutely appropriate. So I guess that's what I'd
Absolutely.
say.
I agree 100%.
Thank you.
Absolutely. During all this in the trial, did you find it exhausting? Because I mean, that's a lot. I'm not going to say stress, but it's an emotional thing. I mean, it's hard to not be emotional when you're, you know, trying to convict a murder like this of a little kid.
Trials are exhausting. Anyone who
Mhm.
suggests that it's not, if you, as a lawyer,
Mhm.
if I didn't believe someone was guilty 100%, I couldn't prosecute them because I'm a terrible liar. I just can't do it. And
Mhm.
so when you put your heart into anything, and nights and weekends and interviewing and digging. I mean, I'd never been out digging so much,
Right.
looking for baby Brandon. So, with all of that, oh yeah, I was totally exhausted. Um, and my kids hadn't seen me for about 3 weeks. So,
Mhm.
fortunately, they were still glad to see me.
Mhm. Absolutely. So what's
Um,
next for you?
well, I don't know. I'm still working as a lawyer
Mhm.
and still trying to protect people. I work in a cyber fraud unit where we try and protect consumers.
Mhm.
And one day I may be a prosecutor again.
There you go. There you go.
My dad was a lawyer and he was in trial, a jury trial the week that he died at 89.
Mhm.
So I hope that I'll be in trial then too.
There you go. And speaking of geezer, I took a geezer nap today, so
I may need one tomorrow. This is late for me.
There you go. Well, on that note, how can people find you?
Um, Me, I
Yes.
am. I don't have a website for the book anymore,
Okay.
but Wild Blue Press was, and the book is available on Amazon, and there's an Amazon author page that I'm certainly involved in, and I mean all of the, it's Barnes and Noble, anywhere you want to get it, you have to order it. Not all bookstores have it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's one of the really cool things when you go to a tiny little town and look in their little bookstore, and there it is. It's exciting. So,
Yeah, it is.
yeah, the easiest way, I guess, would be through Amazon's author page.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Diane, I know it's late for you. Thank you so much for coming on. I was so looking forward to this interview, and it did not disappoint. And maybe I'll get a hold of you to talk about your other book
Thank you so much,
later
Charlotte.
on
I
down the line.
really enjoyed it.
It'd be great to have you back on to talk about that.
You're very kind. Take
All
care.
right.
Thank
You have a
you.
great evening. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.
Okay. Yeah, I learned so much, and I mean that takes me back to covering cases like this. And then when she talked about how a lot of that juvenile stuff is private, it is. And I remember sitting on quite a few juvenile cases where there were no cameras, there was nothing allowed in there, and you just have to sit in there. And then of course you're being very careful about what you can put in the newspaper as well about these things. But wow, what an interview! It's just so sad, just so sad. Tomorrow I will be here at 4 p.m. Pacific. It's going to be an early evening thing because I have something going on in the evening. So I'm going to be here by myself. I'm going to be talking about. I got this flyer from SMUD, which is our electric district here. They handle all the electricity for Sacramento and parts out. It's interesting because I had that discussion about how to tell if your house is haunted on Friday. And when I did that, I kind of talked about high EMF, which is electromagnetic frequencies, and I was talking about that and how they can affect your brain and cause hallucinations and stuff. Well, it's interesting. What fascinated me this week was that when I was going through my mail, at the bottom of my mailbox, there's a flyer, and it is from SMUD, and it's about electromagnetic pulse. And I started to do some research. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you guys and talk about the comparison of the two. And could electromagnetic pulse affect this like regular EMF frequencies do? So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. And again, a lot of people, like I have one of my investigators lived in an apartment that's right behind her main wall in her living room. There was one of those smart meters, and she was seeing like brown figures in her house, and it was because of the meter. Because those things are putting out so much. So I thought I would do a show on that. So tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific, I will be talking about electromagnetic pulse meters and electromagnetic frequencies and how they affect or might affect our health. Okay, we'll say might. I'm not going to say can, but might be affecting our health. All right, that'll be tomorrow's show. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I know this is a topic we don't do very often. Where I don't, where I put my reporter hat on, but. It was nice. It was nice to do this. As you can see at the bottom, I do have a ticker going, and we are still a little short for our bills. If you guys could find it in your hearts to help out a little bit, you can do that at Venmo, California Haunts, and that's what you have to type is California Haunts Venmo, or you can do that at PayPal.me at California Haunts, and I'm sorry, PayPal.me/California Haunts. The at California is YouTube. So I really appreciate it. If you don't, that's fine too. Right, and I am just about done with that Patreon. I keep saying it, and yeah, it should. And I'm going to have some really cool goodies for you guys over that sign up and subscribe over at Patreon. So we'll be doing that. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific. So if you liked the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here. We're just trying to get the word out about our show. And like I said, you guys have been doing great. Let's keep up the good work on that. And I want to thank you all, and I will see you tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific, for EMP and EMF frequencies. Bye.